You've probably told yourself, I'm just being cautious when stepping back from a challenge. Maybe it sounded wise, reasonable, even mature. But what if, beneath all that apparent prudence, what's really hiding is a wounded pride, afraid not of the fall, but of how the fall might look to others? There's a silent kind of suffering that afflicts those who refuse to risk looking foolish. They don't scream. They don't fail loudly. Instead, they quietly shrink their lives to fit within the narrow corridors of their ego's comfort zone. And they call it wisdom. But here's the painful truth. Many of us are not being careful. We're being proud. We mask our avoidance with rational arguments, dressed up in language like stability, strategy, or self-preservation. Yet the driving force is often vanity, an image of ourselves that we're terrified to see cracked. This is not prudence. True prudence, as Aquinas teaches, is the virtue of acting rightly in accordance with reason. But reason must be grounded in reality, not in self-protective illusion. When our so-called prudence serves only to shield us from the risk of being seen as less than competent, it ceases to be virtue and becomes vice. Why is this so dangerous? Because it stalls our growth. No one matures without confronting failure. No one develops depth without risking exposure. The very act of learning demands that we step into territory where we might be wrong, imperfect, or judged. If your primary concern is how you'll look, rather than what you'll become, you've already chosen appearance over substance. Ask yourself honestly, how often do you avoid something not because it's wrong or unwise, but because you can't bear the image of being seen trying and failing? This is not fear, it's pride. And until you name it as such, you'll continue calling cowardice caution and stagnation wisdom. Let this video be a gentle confrontation. If this resonates, write in the comments, I've mistaken ego for wisdom. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me as we dig deeper into how pride quietly holds us back from becoming who we're meant to be. We like to think we're preserving our dignity when we choose silence over vulnerability, detachment over risk, control over openness. But very often what we call dignity is nothing more than our pride licking its wounds in private. It's not nobility, it's fear masquerading as strength. You've seen this in yourself, haven't you? That moment after being misunderstood, when instead of clarifying or reaching out, you retreat. You tell yourself, I won't stoop to explain. They should know me better. But the real reason isn't principle, it's ego. You've been hurt, and you'd rather preserve your image than rebuild the bridge. There's a subtle yet profound difference between genuine dignity and wounded vanity. Dignity has nothing to prove. It stands firm, even when exposed. Vanity, on the other hand, is always calculating, always watching. It seeks shelter not in truth, but in appearances. And this confusion is deadly to growth. Because the moment you believe that remaining untouched, unchallenged, and intact is a moral victory, you lock yourself out of the very process that builds character. Breaking, struggling, being humbled, and starting again. Julian Marius once pointed out that real growth involves accepting the drama of life, the tensions, the humiliations, the unpredictable moments where we don't come out looking good. He believed that without this dynamic tension, we don't live. We merely protect ourselves from living. So ask yourself, what parts of your life have you avoided revisiting? Not out of wisdom, but because the thought of being seen as weak or mistaken is unbearable. This isn't about throwing yourself into chaos. It's about refusing to pretend that your image is more valuable than your soul. The soul grows through contact, with others, with reality, with our own imperfection. Pride resists this contact. It prefers a polished facade over messy truth. But there's no nobility in that. Only stagnation dressed up as self-respect. Try this. The next time you feel tempted to withdraw in the name of dignity, pause and ask, is this truly about what's right or about how I want to be perceived? The answer might unsettle you, but it will also free you. And remember, healing often begins where pride ends. There's a peculiar pain that only adults feel, the ache of having to begin again. Not just starting something new, but starting from zero. With no recognition, no guarantee, no applause. Just the raw exposure of being a beginner again in a world that expects you to have it all figured out. Many of us would rather stay stuck in mediocrity than endure that. But why? The common excuse is fear, fear of failure, fear of rejection. But dig deeper, and you'll find something more insidious: pride. Not the loud, boastful kind, but the quiet, fragile kind that cannot bear to be seen fumbling, awkward, or ignorant. We associate adulthood with competence. We've built identities around being someone in the eyes of others. Someone who knows, who leads, who performs. So when life invites us into unfamiliar territory, our ego screams, "But I won't look capable." And that scream is often enough to keep us from moving. This is not a rational fear. It's a narcissistic wound, a deep attachment to the image we've crafted of ourselves: strong, competent, unshakable. To start over would be to crack that image, and the more tightly we've fused our worth to that image, the more painful the idea of beginning again becomes. But here's the irony: all true growth requires this humility. In his Ethics, Aristotle insists that virtue is cultivated through habituation, which means we must be willing to do things badly before we can do them well. There is no shortcut. No one graduates into excellence. We crawl into it, clumsy, confused, often humiliated. Those who refuse to go through that stage don't avoid pain. They just choose a different kind of suffering, the slow erosion of meaning that comes from never moving forward. So let me ask you, what calling, what project, what conversation have you postponed because you cannot bear the discomfort of being new at it? If you wait until you're ready, you'll never begin. If you wait until you're confident, you'll miss the very experiences that could have shaped you. You are not too old to be a beginner, but you may be too proud. And that's not just unfortunate, it's tragic. The question is no longer whether you feel fear. The real question is, can you bear to look small for the sake of becoming great? And if not now, when? Humility is one of those virtues that's often misunderstood, reduced to self-effacement, silence, or a refusal to stand up for oneself. Many picture it as passivity, as letting others walk over you. But that's not humility. That's insecurity dressed up as virtue. True humility is active. It's lucid. It's the courageous recognition of your real place in the world. Nothing more, nothing less. St. Thomas Aquinas defined humility not as thinking less of oneself, but as having an accurate estimation of who you are in relation to reality. That includes your limitations, yes, but also your capacities, your potential, your responsibility. To be humble is not to hide. It is to stand where you are with clarity and without illusion. And that's hard, because illusion is comforting. Pride whispers that we're better than others, or at least better than we really are. Shame, its counterfeit cousin, insists we're worthless, but both are distortions. Humility, by contrast, demands honesty. And honesty always costs something. There's deep strength in the person who can say, "This is what I know, this is what I don't. This is where I failed, this is where I must grow." That posture doesn't shrink a person, it frees them. It releases the constant pressure to perform, to impress, to uphold a false image. It allows for actual transformation, and transformation requires a starting point. If you can't admit where you are, you'll never move toward where you could be. This is not theoretical. Think about it practically. Can you ask for help without making excuses? Can you apologize without defending yourself? Can you acknowledge your ignorance without collapsing into shame? These are not small things. They are signs of a soul in motion, of someone willing to be seen truly, not just admired superficially. Viktor Frankl wrote that self-transcendence, the ability to go beyond oneself, is the essence of human fulfillment. But no one transcends the self who cannot first see the self clearly, and that's humility. So try this. Today, name one area of your life where you've been pretending to know more, be more, or feel more than you actually do. Just name it. Let the truth breathe. And from that place, begin again. Not as a punishment, but as a path toward real strength. Because humility isn't the enemy of dignity, it's the only way to find it. You know that knot in your chest when you think of someone you haven't forgiven? That lingering ache that comes up in certain conversations, or the cold distance you've carefully preserved in the name of boundaries. It might feel like self-respect, but very often it's just pride, keeping you from a healing you secretly long for. Forgiveness is hard, reconciliation is harder, but what makes them nearly impossible is not the depth of the wound, it's the depth of our ego. We convince ourselves we're waiting for the right moment, or that the other person doesn't deserve our forgiveness. Sometimes we tell ourselves that if we forgive, we'll be condoning what happened. But beneath all these justifications, what we often fear most is looking weak, or worse, being the first to reach out. Why does that feel so unbearable? Because pride tells us that to lose ground in a conflict is to lose ourselves. It frames forgiveness as surrender, as if extending grace is some kind of defeat. But that's a lie, a damaging one. Forgiveness is not passivity. It's not erasing justice or pretending something didn't hurt. Forgiveness is the refusal to let your identity be shaped by resentment. It is an act of inner strength, an interior declaration that you are more than the sum of your wounds. Aquinas said that mercy is the greatest expression of power, because it goes beyond what is deserved and reflects divine love. Pride cannot do this. Pride only calculates. It keeps score. It waits for the other to move first. And in doing so, it traps us in emotional limbo, preserving pain instead of transforming it. Think of someone in your life whom you've not yet forgiven. Maybe it's been years. Ask yourself honestly, what's really stopping you? Is it the magnitude of what they did, or is it the fear of appearing vulnerable, of being the one who gives in? There's nothing noble in withholding forgiveness out of ego. It doesn't protect you. It poisons you. Slowly, quietly, until even your joys feel heavy and your peace feels counterfeit. If a bridge can be rebuilt, why not be the one who lays the first stone? Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve to be free. You don't need permission to forgive. You need courage. And that courage begins where pride ends. There's a practice in Stoic philosophy that may, at first, seem almost absurd to our modern mindset. It's called the descensus voluntarius, the voluntary descent. Seneca, the Roman Stoic, advised that from time to time, we should choose discomfort. Not because we love suffering, but because we need to train the soul to withstand it. Wear simpler clothes, eat plain food, sleep on the floor. Place yourself willingly below the status you normally enjoy. Why? Because this strips pride of its illusions. It reminds us that our dignity is not dependent on our comfort or our image. It teaches us that what we fear most, being seen as less, is survivable. And not just survivable, transformative. We spend so much energy avoiding situations that make us look small. But what if, instead of dodging them, we entered them deliberately? What if we chose, in small and symbolic ways, to experience what our pride fears? This is not self-punishment. It's preparation. It's how we become spiritually agile, unafraid of the inevitable dips and humiliations of life. Think of it this way. Pride makes you fragile. It conditions you to depend on admiration, success, and control. But when you train yourself to be low, you become free. You're no longer terrified of what people think. You're no longer imprisoned by status or appearances. Jesus spoke of this paradox. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. The descent is not the end. It's the beginning. The seed only bears fruit once it's buried. So here's a challenge. This week, choose a moment to be underestimated. Take on a task beneath your status. Admit you don't know something in front of others. Accept being misunderstood without rushing to defend yourself. And then, observe what happens inside you. Notice the voices of protest. You're better than this. They'll think you're weak. And in that moment, see clearly. Those voices are not truth. They're pride, afraid of losing its throne. But you are not your throne. You are not your image. You are something deeper, more enduring, more resilient. The voluntary descent is not about humiliation. It's about liberation. Practice it. Not to suffer, but to grow strong in the places where pride keeps you soft. You know that quiet voice inside you. the one that whispers about the work you could do, the contribution you might make, the words you long to speak. It's there for a reason. It's the voice of vocation, of calling. But for many, that voice is slowly drowned out, not by failure, but by the fear of looking foolish on the way to success. It's not that you don't have something to offer. You do. It's not that you lack skill entirely. Maybe you even have more than enough to begin. But pride steps in with a loaded question. What if I'm not brilliant from the start? And that's enough to stop you. We often romanticize purpose, as if discovering our path will fill us with endless confidence. But in truth, the early stages of any real vocation are filled with doubt, awkwardness, and public imperfection. And that's precisely where many get stuck. Not because they can't begin, but because they can't bear being seen as beginners. Pride isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers, "You're not ready," when really it means, "You're not guaranteed to shine." It tells us to wait, to polish, to plan more. But behind all that delay is one raw emotion, the terror of being ordinary while trying to do something extraordinary. And yet that's exactly how greatness begins, not with brilliance, but with presence. Not with applause, but with offering. In Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl reminds us that true fulfillment doesn't come from chasing success. It comes from responding to life's demands with responsibility. Your vocation isn't about you being amazing. It's about you showing up where you're needed. So here's the truth that pride can't bear. You might be average at first. You might make mistakes. People might not notice. But if you withhold your gift until you're perfect, you're not protecting your dignity. You're betraying your calling. What dream have you silenced because you were afraid of being mediocre? Uncover it. Dust it off. Then take one small step, not for glory, but for service. Because the world doesn't need your perfection. It needs your courage and your pride. It will never applaud you for starting, but your soul will. I'm just being true to myself. It sounds noble, doesn't it? Authentic, honest. But how often is that phrase not a declaration of integrity, but a defense of pride? We tell ourselves we're standing by our principles, when in fact we're just clinging to an image we've grown comfortable with. One that says, "This is who I am. I don't do that. I don't go there. I don't change." But what if that image is outdated? What if the self you're being loyal to is actually a version of you shaped more by fear than by truth? This is the quiet tragedy of self-deception, mistaking a rigid self-image for identity. And the cost is enormous. We sacrifice growth. We resist correction. We avoid anything that might threaten the way we've come to see ourselves, or want to be seen by others. But real identity is not static. It's not a mask you put on and protect. It's a dynamic relationship with reality. And sometimes being true to yourself means letting go of who you thought you were, so you can become who you were meant to be. The philosopher Julian Marias spoke often of the idea of biographical structure, that who we are is not a fixed object but a story in motion. We are projects, not products. But pride wants to freeze that story at a chapter where we looked good, where we were right, where we felt in control, and that's where growth dies. If you find yourself saying, "I just don't do that," pause and ask, is that a boundary rooted in wisdom or a limitation rooted in pride? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Many people go through life not living from their soul, but from a carefully curated self-image. They're not being authentic. They're being consistent with the mask they've worn long enough to believe it's real. Integrity doesn't mean never changing. It means staying aligned with the truth, even when the truth demands that you evolve. So ask yourself, what version of yourself are you trying to protect? And what parts of your life are you unwilling to challenge because they're too bound up with your identity? Pride guards illusions, but truth invites transformation, and only one of those leads to freedom. In Dostoevsky's novels, humiliation is not just a plot device, it's a spiritual trial. Again and again, we meet characters brought to their knees, stripped of pride, disgraced in the eyes of others. But for Dostoevsky, that descent is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of redemption, if and only if the soul stays soft. Because humiliation, if met with pride, leads to bitterness. But if endured with humility, it can lead to rebirth. Think of Prince Mishkin in The Idiot. He is mocked, misunderstood, ridiculed for his simplicity. And yet, he doesn't retaliate. He doesn't harden. His dignity is not built on defending his image. It flows from an interior clarity, a quiet moral strength that can't be touched by external shame. Contrast that with characters like Fyodor Pavlovich in The Brothers Karamazov, a man driven by pride, unable to bear the thought of being seen as foolish. His humiliation only deepens his corruption because he refuses to be changed by it. He clings to ego and ends up disfigured by it. We all face moments that threaten our pride. Moments where we're exposed, misunderstood, corrected publicly, or forced to admit failure. The question is not whether we will be humiliated, it's how we will respond when it happens. Will we harden into resentment or soften into wisdom? Modern culture tells us never to let ourselves be humiliated. Always respond, always defend, always manage your image. But this leads to a fragile self, terrified of losing face. Dostoevsky offers another path. Embrace the fall not as defeat but as a sacred opening. There is a peculiar strength in the person who can be humiliated and remain whole, who can admit fault, endure criticism, even be laughed at, and still love, still hope, still act with integrity. That's not weakness. That's moral greatness. So ask yourself, what humiliation have you carried as a wound when it could have been a turning point? Maybe it wasn't about shame, but about shedding an illusion. Maybe it was the only way to strip away the pride that kept you from seeing clearly. Don't waste your humiliations. Let them refine you, because sometimes the soul shines brightest when the ego is cracked open. Imagine a clay jar, perfectly shaped, smooth, without a single crack. Beautiful, perhaps. Impressive, but empty, because it has never been tested, never been used. And if you pour something into it, it might hold for a while. But the moment pressure comes, it shatters because it was never made strong through stress. Now picture another vessel, not flawless, not elegant, cracked in places, worn. But those cracks have been sealed, not hidden. The light shines through them, and it holds something real, because it's been through something real. This is what pride can never become. Pride builds a shell, polished, guarded, impressive, but fragile. It cannot hold truth, because truth requires openness. And pride resists being opened. We spend years protecting ourselves from breaking, avoiding failure, sidestepping vulnerability, denying need. But in doing so, we often stay hollow, not because we are empty, but because we refuse to be filled with anything that requires us to first be broken. Growth is not about preserving the vessel. It's about becoming capable of containing something meaningful. Love, truth, humility, grace. And those don't enter through perfection. They enter through the cracks. This is echoed in so many traditions. In Christianity, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. In Japanese aesthetics, the art of kintsugi fills cracks with gold, honoring the vessel not despite its wounds, but because of them. Even in psychology, healing often begins when we stop pretending we're not wounded. So here's the paradox. The more you try to be unbreakable, the more brittle you become. But the moment you allow yourself to be humbled, you begin to grow strong, not in image, but in essence. What would it mean for you to stop hiding your cracks? Maybe it means admitting a weakness, reaching out for help, apologizing, or simply beginning something new poorly and letting others see it. These are not acts of defeat. They are acts of courage, because only those who risk breaking can discover what they're truly made for. So if something in this journey spoke to you, write in the comments. I choose to be a cracked vessel. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and remember, your strength is not in being untouched, but in becoming someone who can hold what's real. Let the light in, through the cracks,